Synthetic fuel. Word on the street is that this special carbon neutral fuel can save the internal combustion engine. People are saying that we don't need electric cars. All we have to do is invest in this great new CO2 neutral, fancy pants, next generation petrol, and all of our environmental and transport issues will be solved. I see it all the time in the comments. It seems like people really believe that this is the way forward. Some people don't like electric cars, they don't want to let go of petrol, and they see this as the solution. Now, I've done a video on synthetic fuels in the past, but I wanted to revisit the topic. We're currently doing Evember on the channel, which is our EV only month in 2021. And I think that now is the perfect time to break down whether it has potential to work against or even work with electric cars, or if it's actually just a complete distraction. So, in order to understand synthetic fuels and why they might be needed, we first need to understand fossil fuels and the issues associated with using fossil fuels. The way the internal combustion engine works is that they need hydrocarbons, and we get this from crude oil stored beneath the surface of the earth. Oil companies will pump it and then refine it and then send it to a petrol station where you'll put it into your car, your engine will burn it, and that process of combustion releases hydrocarbons, carbon dioxide plus a bunch of other bad stuff like nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, and ozone into the atmosphere. How much? Well, quite a lot. Every single litre you burn in your car produces a lot of CO2. Every litre of petrol produces 2.37 kilograms of CO2. Every litre of diesel makes 2.72 kilograms. I did some maths, and my BMW X5, which let's say has an 83 litre fuel tank, makes 226 kilograms of CO2 per tank. If I do 400 miles on a tank and 10,000 miles a year, that's around 25 tankfuls. That's 5.5 tons of CO2 I pump into the atmosphere. And that's just me. There's around 1.5 billion cars in the world, so the amount of CO2 being pumped into the environment is quite substantial. Why is that a problem? Well, it's an issue because the more we drive, the more we burn, and the more CO2 gets trapped in the environment. Now, when you have too much carbon in the atmosphere, it traps heat, causing the planet to become warmer than it otherwise might be naturally. That's what they call global warming. Now, the vast majority of climate scientists will agree that there is a link between the increasing levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and increasing temperatures. Increased temperatures leads to, guess what? Climate change. And it's not even up for debate. This is the reason that almost all of the world's leaders right now are in Scotland at COP26 trying to dream up new ways to reduce our carbon footprint. So, could synthetic fuels be one way of helping us out of this situation? Well, these fuels work a bit differently to fossil fuels. Instead of taking hydrocarbons, i.e. hydrogen and carbon, from crude oil beneath the surface, it uses a process that combines hydrogen harvested from water with carbon that's been extracted from the air. You refine that into fuel, either diesel or petrol, and then you pump it into your car, and Bob's your uncle. Synthetic fuel. Now, that still emits CO2 into the atmosphere during combustion, but because you're taking CO2 from the air, you're not necessarily putting more CO2 into the atmosphere because you're theoretically just borrowing some from here, burning it, and then putting it back, i.e. it's a sustainable solution. So how do you make synthetic fuel? Well, nothing's free in this world, so you need quite a lot of electricity. That's the key ingredient, believe it or not. Basically, you use an electrolyzer, which is a gadget that uses electricity to separate water into hydrogen and oxygen in a process called electrolysis. Now you got your hydrogen, you need carbon. And there's a bunch of different ways you can capture carbon, one of which is a technique called direct air capture. Dumbing this down massively, this uses machines to act like a massive air dehumidifier. Now, with a dehumidifier, moist air goes in, water gets captured, and then dry air comes out. But with direct air capture for CO2, the process sucks air in, captures the CO2, and then pure air comes out. However, just like your dehumidifier needs electricity to run, so does your CO2 capture device. Just like we need electricity to make hydrogen, remember. Once you've got your CO2 and your hydrogen captured using electricity, let's not forget, guess what you need next? More electricity. Electrolysis is used again to combine CO2 with the hydrogen to create synthetic methanol, which you can effectively turn into synthetic diesel and petrol. So it's quite an energy intensive process. And what's very important to remember is that the very point of synthetic fuels is for them to be carbon neutral and sustainable. Remember the global warming thing that I talked about a couple of minutes ago? That's what we're trying to fix, right? Less carbon in the atmosphere. So all of those crazy amounts of electricity required to make this stuff has to be, guess what? Carbon neutral. If you're using dirty electricity to make dirty fuel, and remember synthetic fuel is still dirty because you burn it and it emits CO2 during combustion, then it's a complete waste of time. You might as well just use crude oil. Now, a few of you in the comments might quite rightly ask if this is a bit hypocritical because we still use, in a lot of cases, dirty electricity to charge up our electric cars. But it's worth me saying, by the way, that electric cars can still be greener than petrol cars, even if the electricity they use comes from fossil fueled power plants. And that's because even if you make electricity from, let's say, coal, which generates CO2, the cars themselves don't put any new CO2 into the air. There's just one source. With e-fuels, if you make synthetic fuel using electricity from coal, then you generate CO2 in that process, and then you still make CO2 when you burn it in your car. With EVs, you might involve CO2 at the beginning, but there's no CO2 at the end. If you're making synthetic fuels, you always have CO2 at the end, so it's pointless having CO2 at the beginning. It would be a complete waste of time. With all that in mind, we can't really use the grid in Europe or America or most other places on the planet for that matter. To make synthetic fuel, you need a place where you can create an abundance of carbon neutral electricity. You need a place with a lot of wind or a lot of waves or a lot of solar. And one place that has all of that in abundance is Wales. Only joking, no. Chile, South America. There are two issues here though. First of all, not everybody lives in Chile. I don't. So once we create the synthetic fuel, we need some way of getting it from Chile or wherever to North America or Europe or wherever the synthetic fuel is actually required. And the second issue is, can Chile or other places in the world where you can generate renewable energy in large amounts produce enough synthetic fuel to keep every single car on the planet running? I'll answer the first question. To transport fuel from Chile, you're going to need a big ship, and ships are one of the most polluting things on the planet. So I guess, oh no, you could run the ship on synthetic fuel. So that's one problem potentially solved. But then the second problem remains, right? Is there enough synthetic fuel to go around? No, is the short answer. Now, as I've reported in my previous video on synthetic fuels, Porsche is working with a group of other companies to create a decent amount of this stuff. They've got a lot of people very excited by the prospect too, and they have a facility in Chile. Now, they say that the first trial output won't be until 2022, but production will reach 55 million litres by 2024 and 500 million litres by 2026. It might sound like quite a lot, but it's literally nothing. The UK alone consumes 45 to 50 billion litres of fuel a year. America, 467 billion litres a year. As for the rest of the world, crazy amounts. Porsche producing half of 1 billion is useless to everybody except Porsche. Their idea, let's be clear, isn't to save the internal combustion engine. It's to save their internal combustion engines, and only in their old cars. They want a way to keep customers' old 911s running at the Porsche experience centers and in various race series involving their cars. So basically, there's just not enough to go around. Not for everyone. And even if all the big players get involved, Shell, ExxonMobil, Texaco, etc., even if all of them wanted to switch from fossil fuels to synthetic fuels, the size of the undertaking would be massive. And I really can't see there being enough places on the planet that can produce the whopping amounts of renewable energy required to produce the whopping amounts of synthetic fuel required by the whopping amounts of cars that we drive and the giant boats that we need to transport them across the world on the planet. Even if there was, we still need electricity for other things, like your laptop that you're watching this on. So will synthetic fuels save petrol engines in cars? The answer, unfortunately, is no. Only for a very small number of cars, and only the ones with Porsche badges on the front. But what about for other types of transport? Like the ships that I mentioned earlier, maybe for planes. Now that might be worth considering. According to a study, commercial airlines worldwide consume around 100 billion gallons of fuel a year. Around COVID times, it was a lot less, around 57 billions of fuel was consumed. If Porsche reckon they can make 500 million litres, then maybe if everybody else in the world clubbed together somehow, maybe it's feasible that we could, as human beings, create the 100 billion or 57 billion gallons that we need of carbon neutral synthetic fuel needed to run commercial airlines, right? Well, probably not. And that's down to the fact there's another problem with synthetic fuels. In case you hadn't realized, it's really inefficient. Remember, you're using clean electricity to make hydrogen, and then using more electricity to capture CO2, and then using more electricity to combine that hydrogen and CO2. And then you're effectively wasting all of that electricity in the process. Because right at the beginning of the process, guess what you made? Hydrogen, which is quite a useful form of energy. Why not just use that in a fuel cell to power your plane or your ship instead of wasting the extra energy with unnecessary steps and then ending up with a fuel at the end that you're going to end up burning and then pumping more CO2 back into the atmosphere? That's the thing we wanted to avoid in the first place, right? But if you stopped at hydrogen right near the beginning and then use that in a fuel cell to power your plane or your train or your ship, then you end up with zero emissions at the start and at the end. I don't want to rain on anybody's parade here, but synthetic fuels, let's face it, are not coming to save us from electric cars. Not happening. They might help preserve the handful of ICE cars that we want to save from extinction if they have a Porsche badge on the front, but that's about it. Sorry. Right. I hope that you learned something new today. Any questions? Drop them down below in the comments, and if there are any other topics that you want me to cover at some point in a future explainer, then let me know. Maybe hydrogen, right? Literally any aspect of the automotive industry and sustainability, let me know. I know it's confusing, but I'll try and get to the bottom of it for you. Right, love you all, thanks for watching. Until next time, peace.